May I have the privilege of calling this session to order? May I request all the distinguished delegates to be seated, and we can then start the proceedings of this opening session with the dignitaries who are here in front of you. I find it a great privilege to ask His Excellency Rasmus Helveg Petersen, the Minister for Climate, Energy and Building, to deliver his opening remarks from the lectern. And then, of course, after conclusion, His Excellency the Minister will return to his seat. Minister Petersen.
Thank you very much. It is really a pleasure to see you all here. I'm glad that you've chosen such an excellent central location, which allows me to come to the meeting on my bicycle, which is a pleasure. And obviously, it's amazing to deal with this problem that we face, the global warming problem. We must draw on all accumulated knowledge we have in the world, and then some. We both need to go back to basics, to the 200-year-old bicycle technology, and forward to new technical territory, yet undreamed of. I was once told by a man who was doing retailing that it doesn't really matter how good an offer you make if no one knows about it. So let's make sure that people out there know what we're up to, so they'll remember to listen on Sunday when we have something important to say. So I'll just do a tweet here on the opening of the conference. Yes, I'll do that. Boom. Okay, I've now, I think, tweeted a photo of yourselves here at the opening. I used the hashtag IPCC, and if you use that, then we can use that to communicate with each other. Obviously, you don't have to be an expert to sit and wait for years with a drill and tape measure to notice the melting of the Greenland ice cap. It happens slowly but surely, like a sunset sinking, like the big hand of a clock turning. You only have to look away for a minute to notice the difference. You can also hear it. The meltwater carves into the ice in sprawling patterns, and it's a beautiful sound of a rushing river had it not been under such ugly circumstances. I heard that sound of the ice melting when I recently visited the inland ice of Greenland. 5 reports are about to pile up on the desks of world leaders. It ought to be a heavy load because the weight on their shoulders, on our shoulders, is a strain on the conscience. We already know that our climate is changing rapidly. It is being tipped off balance by man-made emissions of greenhouse gases. And this poses a threat to life as we know it. In the future, as heavy rain falls in the north and harvest yields drop in the south, so does the value of our real estate and our credibility as humane beings. Today we can measure the rising temperatures, the rising seas, and our rising insurance bills, and tomorrow we have to measure our rising debt to the future generations. As fossil fuel is burning, so is the platform underneath us. We can stop the fire or we can jump into the sea, and the first solution does cost money, and the second seems to be free, but it isn't. The truth is, if we do not pay a small energy bill now, we're going to get a much bigger climate bill later. Let's instead be responsible and make a binding international agreement at the latest in Paris next year. It's not easy to transform a complex society. It's not easy to find a way in the wilderness. Denmark, however, has been among the first countries to enter, and I think we have found a path. We have now 25% renewable energy consumption from zero in the 70s. We've got 30% of our electricity supply coming from wind. Actually, it's 40. We've got a 28% drop in greenhouse gases since 1990. We're well underway to our final goal, which is to become fossil-free by 2050. And by leading the way, we can now leave the traces or tracks for others to follow. Luckily, there are lots of trails to find in the forest, all leading to the fruits hanging out there. The Danish Energy Agency has done their maths, and they've shown that Denmark can arrive at the fossil-free destination by many means and from many directions. And we can do it without jeopardizing the economy. We've cut greenhouse gases by 28% since 1990, and at the same time grown our economy by 38%. Danish exports of clean energy technology have almost tripled since 2000. It has reached $7 billion, or 6% of our total exports. we can afford the green transition, even more so when we add to the equation the related benefits to people's health and to the environment, which is no small matter. We are most happy to share our experiences with others. We are currently assisting China and South Africa, Vietnam and Mexico on ambitious climate and energy policies and regulations. Hopefully every country will find its own way of going forward and leaving the fossils behind. The Green Climate Fund may invite some to come along. Denmark has announced a contribution to the fund of $70 million. The Danish transformation has been driven by stable conditions. Denmark has enjoyed political consensus on this matter, and this has reduced the risk of investing in clean energy. This year we passed a new Climate Act, and the law commits us to listen to what the experts are saying. We're committed to that. We're committed to set goals to combat climate change, and we report to Parliament every year on how we're going. Every country should have its own Climate Act to stay on the climate course, no matter who's leading the way. The distance in miles and the differences of mind are vast between Greenland and Manhattan, but at both places you can observe the climate change full scale. When I visited Greenland this summer, little streams had turned into rivers. But when I visited New York shortly after for the UN Climate Summit, streets had turned into rivers of protesters. This merged river of meltwater and mass movement is forcing us to act. We have to slide into it and change with it. When I watch the protesters and their signs saying, "We are air breathers," when I see how busy people have become riding bicycles or recycling stuff or growing their own vegetables, I think things can change pretty fast, as they will have to. The new mindset is becoming more and more institutionalized. Caring about the climate is something people demand more and more often from their retailers and their pension funds, and it increasingly becomes a part of corporate social responsibility and employer branding. I hope some of this change will be driven not only by necessity but also by self-criticism. It's instinctively wrong to throw garbage on other people's premises. You would never do that. It should be equally wrong to pollute the air through tailpipes and chimneys. It ought to be socially unacceptable to set a bigger footprint on Earth than your 1 in 7 billion set of feet can justify. And I think we will soon be arriving at that. Climate change is just too dangerous to ignore. So let's take responsibility right now. Governments, local communities, companies, and eventually you and I. To take action, we need to know what we should be doing and why we should do it. I'm glad you're here to answer these questions for me and for us. This country is proud to be hosting the panel on climate change. While you will be working, we will be waiting eagerly. In the meantime, I'm going to ride my bike and maybe tweet some more. On Sunday, when you draw your final conclusions, we will all stop whatever we're doing and we'll listen to what you have to say. Thank you very much for coming.
May I thank Minister Peterson for his opening remarks, and may I now have the privilege of inviting Her Excellency Kirsten Brusbel, Minister for the Environment, to deliver her opening remarks from the lectern.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Dr. Pachauri, Minister, Lord Mayor, distinguished delegates. The message from this session of the IPCC is very clear. Climate change is real. It affects people and regions differently, but it affects all of us. The expected damage is immense, and the challenge is overwhelming. Only if we act now, adopt intelligent solutions, and learn from each other, we can reduce the impact that is coming. The severity of the challenge is clearly illustrated in this 5th assessment report from the IPCC. Spine. I wish to thank all of you who have worked tirelessly to ensure this analysis for decision makers to act upon. The evidence makes it clear that not only are the issues we need to address immense, they're also right at our doorstep. We're not talking about events that might come to pass in a distant future. These events are happening right now. We hear dramatic stories of climate events on the news on a daily basis, and the very multitude of these reports might cause some people to tune out, saying, "This is happening somewhere else. What has this got to do with me?" If such an approach was ever viable, it certainly isn't anymore. Dramatic weather events are not confined to a few regions of the world. They're happening globally and at an increasing rate. Rising sea levels have tremendous consequences for small island states in the Pacific, which face having to make substantial investments in securing coastal areas at risk. At the same time, cyclones will be more frequent and pose a threat to low-lying areas. In Africa, rising temperatures will result in drought, which again threatens the production of crops. And in Europe, climate change will result in reduced access to water in the southern parts of the region, happening at the same time as an increased need for water for irrigation, industry, and private households. Here in Denmark, we've witnessed extreme rainfalls in recent years. We're used to rain in Denmark, falling on an average every second day. It's part of the national experience. But during the past 10 years, we've experienced more extreme rain showers and storms in Copenhagen, as well as in many other parts of the country. In 2011, Copenhagen was flooded by an extreme cloudburst. Damages due to the flooding were estimated at more than 650 million euros. Only a little more than a week ago, in the region of northern Jutland, one single locale received 148 millimeters of rain over the course of 36 hours. Normally, this part of the country receives an average of 83 millimeters of rain in the entire month of October. So that's almost twice the monthly average in a mere 2 days. Water from above is only one side of the coin. Flooding as a result of rising sea levels pose a perhaps even greater threat to our everyday lives. Last December, we saw how areas along the harbor in Copenhagen only just avoided flooding by an extreme storm surge. Many areas of the country, including many private homes, were less fortunate. With the IPCC's predictions on the extreme weather of the future, the damages in Denmark and elsewhere are merely a premonition of things to come. The responsibility to act on these facts falls squarely on the shoulders of politicians and decision makers. We cannot sit by and hope for the problems to go away, because they won't. And the longer we wait, the bigger they get. But governments, while bearing the primary responsibility for addressing the challenges facing the world by climate change, cannot fix things on their own. As citizens, we all have a responsibility to be mindful of how our actions affect the world surrounding us. One of the most important tasks for all governments and city administrations, not least for me and my colleagues as Ministers for Climate and Environment, are how we provide individuals with tools to fight back. Citizens can play a key role in preventing further climate change, and they can help adapting to these changes in their own backyard. It's in all our interests to act before the effects of inaction and the costs become insurmountable. The UN has estimated that by 2050, up to 350 million people will have to abandon their homes and settle in other areas due to climate change. To avoid this, let's learn from each other. Good solutions that have worked in other places might also help in other parts of the world. In Denmark, we look to other countries that are used to dealing with heavy rainfall and storm surges to find smart solutions. And maybe we can provide inspirations to others as well. We try to handle water at the surface instead of leading water into the sewer systems. This can save us from flooding our homes with sewage water, but also it gives us more attractive blue and green cities. We also work with smart technology, such as intelligent sewers that empty themselves before heavy cloudbursts. The fifth assessment report clarifies the need to deal with climate change. It serves as a chilling reminder that we have to reduce emissions of greenhouse gas as well as adapt to the changing climate. It also reminds us that governments cannot fix the world's problems alone. It's critical that the challenges are met by public authorities, industry, NGOs, and citizens, all coming together, doing their bit. It's against this bleak backdrop that I once again thank you for your efforts regarding the adoption of the fifth assessment report, and I wish you a fruitful and productive meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, for your very enlightened remarks. May I now call on Mr. Frank Janssen, Lord Mayor of Copenhagen, to deliver his address.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Passari, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. As Lord Mayor, it's a great honor for me to welcome you all to Copenhagen. As you know, today more than half of the world's populations live in cities. City leaders have to act here and now on the challenges our citizens are facing, and I can assure you that Copenhagen already feels the impact on the climate change. As the Minister just mentioned, back in 2011, Copenhagen experienced a cloudburst with more than 150 millimeters of rain in less than 2 hours. We had insurance damages for almost €1 billion. So cities, even more than national governments, need to adapt rapidly to the climate change. And mayors are acting all over the world. Many cities, including Copenhagen, have their own very ambitious climate goals. We want to lead the way for national governments. This is why Copenhagen has become member of the C40, the international network of the world's largest cities focusing on climate change. In September, I took part in the meeting in the C40 Steering Committee during the New York Climate Week. We agreed at that meeting to support the so-called Compact of Mayors. We agreed to support this because it's the world's largest effort for cities to fight climate change. But climate commitments and targets of CO2 reduction are not enough to save our planet. We need to develop and implement sustainable solutions together with private business and industry and together with research institutions. Let me give you an example. Copenhagen has already reduced CO2 emissions by 40% from 1995 until 2012, 40%. And we have been working hard to become the world's first carbon-neutral capital city in 2025. Our district heating system is vital in this process. 98% of all households in Copenhagen are connected to the system. It has been developed and improved over time by public and private stakeholders. We are already testing new next generation of sustainable solution. One example is our new district cooling system. We are using the cold water from our harbor, taking out the cold from the water to cool down buildings during summer times. District cooling saves us 70% of energy used for conventional air conditioning of houses. We need more solutions like this on a global scale. I'm happy to share Danish and Copenhagen solution with other cities and nations, from Hamburg in Germany to Beijing in China or New York in US. Sharing is the key if we want to succeed. We must learn from the best and the worst examples from other cities and nations to adapt them into a local condition. And I'm sure if we join forces, climate change can be a huge opportunity for cities and nations. If we tackle climate change the right way, we will be able to reduce CO2 emissions, create jobs, new jobs for all the youngsters, and to make our cities even more livable. This is my vision, and Copenhagen and many other cities are well on their way. Now, national leaders must take action and make an international climate agreement in Paris next year at the COP21. I'll end my opening speech by thanking you for your incredible work in the IPCC reports. It is because of you and the scientists all over the world, it's because of your fantastic work that we as politicians can have knowledge and can make the right decisions to help and save the planet. I wish you all a fantastic stay here in Copenhagen. Thank you all for coming, and I look forward to see you all again in the evening at a reception at City Hall. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and we indeed look forward to seeing you this evening at the City Hall. May I now request Mr. Jeremiah Langwosa to deliver his address on behalf of WMO.
Excellencies, Honorable Ministers Peterson and Roswell, Lord Mayor of Copenhagen, John Christensen, representing UNEP, as well as Florine Vladu, representing the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Dr. Pachauri. Honorable ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Secretary General of WMO, Michel Jarraud, and of course of my own in this capstone event for the assessment report, the fifth assessment report. This is, of course, the most comprehensive assessment of climate change since the commencement of the assessment process with the founding of the IPCC, jointly by UNEP and the WMO a number of years ago. More than 800 scientists were selected as authors, and this morning I would say again that the statements from the ministers are a clear indication that indeed there are policymakers who are listening and are prepared to act. Recently in New York, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon organized a climate summit. This climate summit again brought to the fore the reports of the IPCC and the presence of the leadership of the IPCC at that event, including working group chairs, was a resounding success in communicating the outputs of the fifth assessment report. Certainly, news over the last week of the European Union's negotiations and the announcement of their position for the United Nations Framework Convention process should be indeed encouraging to this community, that not only are individual governments like Denmark, as we have heard this morning, but also collectives of governments, ready to listen and prepared to act, using the scientific knowledge, amongst other components, of course, but would like to believe that it is using the knowledge generated and this information shared through the assessment process led so ably by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Just yesterday and over the last few months, of course, the IPCC has been engaging in very lively and thoughtful discussions on the future work of the IPCC beyond the fifth assessment report. And certainly, your eagerness all points to a need to continue to contribute meaningfully to policy relevance assessment that continue to meet the expressed need of various policymakers in various walks of life, from cities to countries, to collectives of countries for such assessments to be made available. The WMO, of course, is proud to co-sponsor the IPCC, and the extent to which the work coming out of the IPCC influences the programmatic areas of our work is self-evident. Let me quickly refer to the latest greenhouse gas bulletin issued just over a few weeks ago, which confirms the findings of the AR5 that show that concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide reached record levels in 2013. With the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere particularly increasing at the fastest rate over the nearly 30 years that has passed. We will, of course, also issue a statement on the state of the climate in 2014 over the next few weeks. This is observed climate, the state of the climate, and of course, with El Niño and the outcomes of the El Niño conference, which is planned for November in Ecuador, these results will be made available. Suffice to say at this point, all indications are we may be in for the warmest year on record. Last month's report, of course, by WMO and UNEP, showing that ozone layer is on track to recovery is a reminder that indeed, when the global community puts their mind together, having access to the best scientific knowledge, solutions can be found. And the Montreal Protocol is but an inspiring example of what the global community can achieve when it does put its mind to an issue. Reports of the working groups, of course, have been well responded to by the research and meteorological community in general. Let me cite a few of these instances. Just recently, the joint IPCC-WCRP workshop were held in Brussels, focusing on regional aspects of the AR5 outcome, and also in Bern on lessons learned from AR5 for climate change research and the World Climate Research Program. One can also cite the very recent World Climate Research Program and the European Meteorological Satellite Climate Research and Earth Observation Symposium, also held a few days ago. Of course, these are but a drop in the ocean in terms of other processes which have already commenced, which include the modeling community's ongoing discussions on CIMIP 6 and the linkages to the grand challenges of the World Climate Research Program. There are, of course, possibly many more activities that one can cite where climate science community is focusing on the very issues that you have raised in the fifth assessment report and that you would conclude over the next few days. Not least among them, where does all the heat go and where does all the fresh water go? Climate science, of course, helps us explain the past. It helps us understand the present and helps us predict the future. But this knowledge has only utility when it is understood and used. Thus, communication, of course, is a key part of the IPCC's responsibility. One example of this communication, working in partnership with the IPCC, the WMO, have been able to mainstream the climate information based on the AR5 into weather bulletins produced by weather forecasters who have enormous reach and credibility in their local communities. Thanks, honorable ministers, and it's good to see both of you here, for the support that you have offered for the weather reports from the year 2050 activity. This has been broadcast not only in New York but worldwide and is also available on the website where they've simply chosen one scenario from the AR5. Certainly at the UN summit last month, these weather forecasters were brought to New York and were able to interact with various policymakers in New York, with again a view of ensuring that there is access to this knowledge and information, and that certainly it can influence decisions. This exercise will continue, and we're grateful for the support of Denmark in continuing this activity over the next few months, including leading up to the COP21 in Paris. It is but one example of efforts to implement the approved IPCC communication strategy and plan, and the participation of the chairs of the working groups in implementation of this plan has again proven the tenacity and the dedication of the IPCC to ensuring that this information is accessible to as many as is possible. And so you can again stand ready, WMO stands ready to assist in the process of disseminating the outcomes of your process this week. Without being exhaustive then of the issues that you will talk about, let me first appreciate the presence of the honorable ministers and Lord Mayor, and wish you all successful deliberations over the next week, and the greatest success in concluding what has been a long, arduous, but hopefully fruitful process in concluding the 5th assessment report. Thank you very much, Dr. Pachauri, and wish you well.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General of the WMO. May I now turn to Mr. John Christensen, Director, DTU Partnership of UNEP, to deliver his statement on behalf of the Executive Director of UNEP and Under Secretary General of the United Nations. John.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Pachauri. Honorable Ministers, Lord Mayor, and Dr. Pachauri again, esteemed colleagues and delegates, as a former Bureau member of the IPCC, and I've also been lead author on a number of earlier reports, it's a real personal pleasure for me to be here today on behalf of Achim Steiner and the UN Environment Programme and address the opening of the 40th session of the IPCC. I think the event marks, as we all know, a very crucial moment in the fight against climate change as we prepare to adopt the synthesis of the 5th assessment report and the summary for the policymakers during this week. These will provide the scientific foundations for the urgently needed policy responses and hopefully will shine light on how we can best meet the climate challenge. I think the importance is underlined by the fact that this meeting is taking place just a few weeks ahead of the UN conference in Lima, where negotiators will hopefully endeavor to broker what will end up as a breakthrough climate agreement next year in Paris. We commend the IPCC for the extraordinary efforts that they've undertaken to deliver this up-to-date, definitive and very comprehensive assessment of the impacts and risks of climate change and the opportunities for both short and long-term responses. The AR5 provides real conclusive scientific evidence that human activities continue to cause unprecedented changes in the Earth's climate, with the conclusion that we need to elevate the level of political commitment and action if we are to avoid the potentially catastrophic impacts of climate change. Building on the scenarios that are used in the AR5, UNEP will, in a few weeks, launch its annual emission gap report. And in that, we focus on what we call the global carbon emission budget for staying within the 2 degrees. And you could say build on the work done here. And it'll send another strong message about the need for urgency and short-term action. It also deals with the fact that inaction now in curbing greenhouse gas emission will require much costlier intervention later to keep the global temperature rise between these 2 degrees. If the necessary action is not taken, adaptation costs, for instance, for Africa alone could reach about 50 billion per year by 2050. If we look at the broader development agenda, the proposed post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals underscore the multiple synergies between development and climate change. For example, efforts to eradicate energy poverty and promote universal access to cleaner forms of energy, if fully realized, would, along with the goals for increased energy efficiency and for renewable energy sources, go a long way towards bringing the world back on a path that's consistent with the 2-degree target. UNEP's own work on ecosystem-based adaptation also shows that the responses to climate change are not only challenges and costs, but also provide opportunity to move towards a more inclusive green economy in which measures deliver both immediate benefits of reducing emissions, multiple benefits on improvement public health, energy efficiency, food security, and so on, and also the ability to invest in mitigation measures while adapting to climate and building long-term resilience. Linking development with climate mitigation will help developing countries positively log in to an energy-efficient, low-emission infrastructure in the coming decades. There are, however, a number of barriers that need to be overcome before such a development will take place and achieve the full potential. Most notable, probably among those, are the lack of adequate large-scale financial incentives. And we see positive signals. I mean, investments in energy efficiency and renewables have reached hundreds of billions per year and has made a real shift in the investment flow in the energy sector. At the Secretary-General Summit that we heard about a couple of times before, there was no shortage of goodwill and action from the finance sector. The global finance sector pledged billions of dollars worth of voluntary action, and more than 300 of the world's top institutional investors, managing maybe around $25 trillion, urged heads of state to provide stable, reliable, and economically meaningful carbon pricing that will help redirect investments. It's clear that public finance is essential to ensure this redirecting of investments into a low-carbon future. It's also clear that capital markets, which control trillions of dollars, with the right incentives, could be directed towards the green economy to close the funding gap for low-carbon energy and transport. Colleagues, a new global climate agreement will need to be backed by innovative bottom-up action and voluntary initiative. UNEP is facilitating a number of these, and I'll just mention a couple to you. Climate and Clean Air Coalition to reduce what we call short-lived climate pollutants is the first global effort to treat these short-lived climate pollutants as an urgent and collective challenge. It started with 7 partners 2 years ago, and today it has about 80 partners, and Denmark is one of the partners to this partnership. And with the rapid growth of it, it really provides a significant input to reduce emissions of things like black carbon, methane, and many hydrofluorocarbons. The Climate Technology Center and Network, located here in Copenhagen with the support of the Danish government, represents another building block in a low-carbon future by accelerating the use of existing and new technologies that can help improve the lives and livelihoods of millions of people in developing countries, those who are dealing with the impacts of climate change on a daily basis. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, in a few weeks, governments will meet in Lima to agree on the foundation for a new climate agreement. They will be armed with the findings of this IPCC report, which leaves no doubt that the cost of inaction is insurmountable in terms of lives and livelihoods, and that the necessary mitigation action, in many cases, if done correctly, could provide multiple social and economic benefits. From UNEP, we extend our strong support to the work of the IPCC, as your assessments continue to inform and provide the strong scientific foundation for hopefully political as well as voluntary action on climate change. On behalf of UNEP, I therefore wish you a very successful session, and may your voice be heard loud and clear as you speak to the world at this critical time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christensen, for that statement on behalf of UNEP. We would now play a video recorded message from Ms. Christiana Figueres, the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Well, maybe we're waiting for her to join us live. I don't know.
He's waving his hand.
Is there a problem with playing the video?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Apparently there is a technical problem, so I think we'll have to skip that. However, I'd like to convey our thanks to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat and the Executive Secretary, Ms. Christiana Figueres. If there is a possibility later on, maybe we can play it at the appropriate stage in the proceedings. But I'd like to convey my thanks to Mr. Florin Vladu, who's representing the UNFCCC Secretariat, to accept our thanks on behalf of the IPCC for Ms. Figueres' message, which I'm sorry can't be played. With this, may I say a few words? Your Excellency, Madame Kirsten Brosbøl, Minister for the Environment, Government of Denmark, Your Excellency, Mr. Rasmus Helveg Petersen, Minister for Climate, Energy and Building, Government of Denmark, Mr. Frank Jansen, Lord Mayor of Copenhagen, Mr. Jeremiah Langåsa, Deputy Secretary General WMO, Mr. John Christensen, Director DTU Partnership UNEP, my colleagues, Vice Chairs of the IPCC, Co-Chairs of the working groups and the NGGIP, Dr. Renate Christ, Secretary of the IPCC, my colleagues on the Technical Support Unit of the Synthesis Report, authors of the Synthesis Report, distinguished delegates, members of the media, and friends. It's a great honor and privilege for me to welcome you to the opening session of the 40th session of the IPCC. Let me take the opportunity on behalf of the IPCC to express my deep gratitude to the government of Denmark for hosting this session in this beautiful city. Copenhagen has long been known for its enlightened citizens and their deep commitment to efficient energy use and sustainable development. We've heard the Excellencies, the Ministers, and the Lord Mayor give us details of several of the achievements that Denmark and Copenhagen have to their credit. I believe in the last 6 months, Denmark produced 40% of the electricity consumed from wind power. So it is indeed fitting for the IPCC to complete the synthesis report of the 5th assessment here in Copenhagen. Thank you for hosting us on this important occasion. The importance of the work that lies ahead cannot be overstated. During the coming week, we will complete and approve the summary for policymakers of the synthesis report and adopt the longer synthesis report itself. The report will provide the roadmap by which policymakers will hopefully find their way to a global agreement to finally reverse the course of climate change. This report gives us the knowledge to make informed choices, the knowledge to build a brighter, more sustainable future. It enhances our vital understanding of the rationale for action and the serious implications of inaction. The report is not a cut and paste from the 3 working group reports that preceded it. Yes, it distills and integrates the findings of the working groups that constitute the bulk of the 5th assessment report, but it also incorporates 2 special reports brought out in 2011, covering both traditional areas and new topics not assessed before by the IPCC. This integrated approach provides fresh insights by highlighting contrasts and making comparisons between findings from all of these source documents. There are justifiable expectations that this synthesis report should set a new benchmark for scientific robustness. It does. Having been associated with the IPCC for more than 20 years as the lead author, vice chair, and chairman, I can state categorically that I've never seen before the scale and intensity of effort that has gone into all the 3 working group reports, but furthermore, I'm deeply impressed with the unprecedented effort that has gone into this synthesis report. The 3 working group reports are the most comprehensive assessment of climate change ever undertaken. The effort to write them sets a new benchmark in scientific assessment. More than 830 coordinating lead authors and review editors supported by over 1,000 contributing authors, took part in writing the 3 reports. The scope of their effort was breathtaking. The reports draw their authority from more than 30,000 scientific publications. Equally remarkable was the fact that all of these experts donated their time as a labor of love, working without any compensation from the IPCC for months and years. I'm deeply humbled by their dedication and grateful for their expertise and inspired by their work. Their effort has resulted in a synthesis report that provides critically important information for policymakers who have the difficult task of finalizing a global climate agreement next year in Paris. I cannot predict the outcome of those negotiations, but I do know that it is critical for policymakers to allow their decisions to be informed by the science. I do not envy them. Their task is formidable. But may I humbly suggest that policymakers avoid being overcome by the seeming hopelessness of addressing climate change. It is not hopeless. Much has been made of the growing peril of delaying the hard choices that need to be made to adapt to and mitigate climate change. I do not discount these challenges, but the synthesis report shows that solutions are at hand. The tremendous strides are being made in alternative sources of clean energy. There is much we can do to use energy more efficiently. Reducing and ultimately eliminating deforestation provides additional avenues for action. This is not to say it will be easy. It won't. A great deal of work and tall hurdles lie ahead, but it can be done. We still have time to build a better, more sustainable world. We still have time to avoid the most serious impacts of climate change. But we have precious little of that time. Distinguished delegates, we are delighted to meet you here in Copenhagen to complete the task that you assigned to us 6 years ago through this collective enterprise involving the governments of the world and the best scientific talent and wisdom. Your guidance, support, and direction have been invaluable and the founding pillars of the IPCC's strength. Before closing, I would like to express my deep gratitude to the 51 core writing team authors of this synthesis report, 18 extended writing team authors, and 10 review editors for their willingness to take on this challenge on top of their existing responsibilities. Working with them has been one of my greatest privileges. I want to offer my special thanks to Dr. Leo Meyer and his colleagues on the Technical Support Unit, whose contribution and dedication made the synthesis report possible. May I once again thank our Danish hosts for their hospitality and help in organizing this meeting. I would also like to congratulate my senior colleagues at the IPCC and the staff of the Secretariat led by Dr. Renate Christ. They have always risen to the occasion and played a major role in facilitating the smooth completion of the working group and synthesis reports. Thank you to all the distinguished delegates and authors here. I wish you a very productive and successful meeting. My final thanks to Their Excellencies, the Ministers of Denmark and the Lord Mayor of Copenhagen for favoring us with their presence. Let me close with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi that sums up the history and experience of tackling difficult challenges. He said, and I quote, "First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win." End of quote. The world owes a profound debt of gratitude to all of you who have done so much to bring forth the knowledge required to meet this epic challenge. Thank you very much. I would change the order a little bit. I believe the video is available now, so we would have the video be played now, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, let me start by thanking Dr. Pachauri and the IPCC for inviting me to be part of the IPCC 40th session, where the synthesis report of the 5th assessment will be adopted and approved. I look forward to the final results of this session, as the synthesis report is a crucial component of the complete AR5, which is proving to be the most up-to-date and influential scientific report on climate change ever released. AR5 is important for its content. It demonstrates humanity is in large part responsible for climate change. It shows everyone is vulnerable, no one is immune. It validates the 97% consensus within the wider scientific community, and it shows the 2-degree limit is still within reach. But AR5 is also important because of its timing. It comes as governments are engaged in taking the global response to climate change to the next level through a meaningful agreement in Paris 14 months from now. In the past year, we have seen the private sector wake up to the physical risk of climate change and the bottom line benefits of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and heightened resilience. National governments, regions, and cities are putting in place policies that point growth towards low carbon, and people are demanding action. This summary for policymakers is extremely timely, considering the building momentum. Policymakers are more receptive now than ever before. We currently have almost 500 climate change laws in more than 60 countries, covering more than 80% emissions. Right now, national governments are preparing their national contributions to the new Universal Climate Change Agreement. The full cabinet in every country is beginning to grasp the fact that climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is a national security issue, a finance and economy issue, and a health issue, and a diplomatic issue. Stable growth is simply not possible in an unstable climate. Policymakers need the best possible risk assessments that are timely, accurate, and above all, impartial. Indeed, impartiality must be at the core of this work in order to make informed and bold decisions nationally and in the multilateral process. So today, I have a request for each of the two groups gathered here, scientists and government delegates. To scientists, I say, keep up the great work. Your contribution is indispensable. Humanity's best chance to truly meet the climate challenge lies with science. Science improves our understanding of the issue we face, and science increases the innovative solutions that represent a path to bending the emissions curve, achieving a long-term goal of full climate neutrality and limiting temperature rise to less than 2 degrees Celsius. You are on the right side of history, and I ask you to keep researching, keep publishing, and keep the wave of climate change evidence coming. To government delegates, I ask you to see the faces of citizens and people behind the numbers, behind the science. Because in the end, the IPCC is here to serve humanity, as we all are, and serve decision-making in ways that maximize positive outcomes for 7 billion people. Dear friends, the AR5 is set to be an invaluable and irreplaceable resource to policymakers, current and future. The synthesis report that comes from this meeting of the IPCC, alongside the full and complete AR5, can deliver crucial information to those who need it most, when it is most needed, and in a manner that is critically needed. You are leaving a legacy to future policymakers, scientists, and leaders of government and industry. I look forward to seeing the results of this meeting in action in Lima and on the road to Paris next year. I thank you for your very good work.
May I once again convey our thanks to Ms. Christiana Figueres and the representatives of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat. May please convey our gratitude to her for her very powerful and pertinent words. With this, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of the opening session of this important plenary. I would once again like to thank all the dignitaries present here at the head table for their participation, their supportive words, and these will certainly be with us and will guide us in our deliberations and discussions in the coming days. I would now request that we suspend the proceedings for 5 minutes. That would enable the dignitaries to leave the conference room and also for the media to withdraw so that we can start the business part of our session in about 5 minutes. Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen.